Good morning. So today I've been thinking a lot about how we talk to each other, and what is important to hold in ourselves, in our awareness, when having a very simple conversation to having a talk that has a little bit more weight to it, especially in that instance. I feel it's very important to be mindful of how we're communicating. And in my thinking about this, I thought a lot about intention, which was an aspect that we talked about with relation to practice. And now, the art of communicating, as Thich Nhat Hanh often refers to it, is one that is an opportunity to perceive as a practice in that way that both Matt and myself spoke about. And when I spoke about practice, the first element that I shared was intention. And I believe that intention is critical for ensuring that what we are communicating and the way we are communicating comes across how we intend it to. Thinking about intention in a way of awareness and somewhat of an educated approach to communicating, so that we aren't careless or thoughtless about what we are communicating, and why ensures that what we're getting across leads to the desired effect. Whereas I feel that that's super important to hold an intention as to how we're communicating and why, I think there's another element that's very important that we don't speak about as often, or at least I had not considered it as often until a couple years ago, when I started to notice what was going wrong about how I was communicating. I have tried to practice right speech in my navigating life, and had really done so through holding intention. The thing about intention, though, is that I know my intention. And so, it got me part of the way there. But I was finding that, another person hearing what I had to say could hear it through a different lens, through something they were feeling in that moment, or an experience that they just had, or historically I was choosing words that they had experienced in a challenging way. In some of those instances, I knew that was the case. I knew my friend or my partner well enough to know that the words I was choosing or the way I was coming at the conversation was going to impact how they received it. And so in that, my intention didn't have as much power. It wasn't fostering clear, compassionate communication, which was my intention. So I began thinking about what was missing. And what was missing for me was attention. So there's intention, and then there's attention. Attention for me means being aware in a slightly different way, really trying to take into account where that person is at, and where I might be intending to communicate something clearly and compassionately. There are a few things for me to consider about how it's going to be received on the other end. And so I have realized that I have to think about if that person's in a place or a state where they can hear what I have to say, Did they just get out of a long shift at work? Did they just, get off the phone with someone they have a challenging relationship with? That environment will really impact how they're going to hear what I have to say, particularly if there's a weight to it. So there's a right time and a right place to share. Sometimes there's an urgency in what we have to share, and we have less say about the environment in which we're saying it. But oftentimes I believe that we can pay attention to what's happening around us and the person with whom we'd want to communicate, to consider if it's the right time and if our words are truly going to be heard the way we intend them to be heard. Another thing about paying attention is considering what we have to say, and if there's a way that we are communicating that is about how we feel about it, that makes a lot of sense that I would express it in that way, but do I know that person well enough to know the words I choose, the tone I take is going to impact how they hear it? Again, we can't always be this particular, but in instances where it matters, where we're really clear in our intention of what we want to say, attention ensures that the environment it's heard within carries that intention forward. So if I know, speaking to a friend of mine and using language that reminds them of someone, reminds them of a circumstance, or even talking about a particular subject, if I know their history well enough, I may want to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more mindful about how I bring that up. I may actually want to start with questions to inform where they're at. I may want to start with a recognition of our relationship, a reminder of who I am and how I feel about them. Because I may know my intention is one of love, but if I catch them in a moment where they're feeling vulnerable, where they're feeling scared, without taking care of them, without taking care of the environment that we're entering into to communicate, what I have to say might not necessarily be heard the way I intend. And finally, attention is important to me in the course of conversation. If I say something and it's my intention for it to come across a certain way, and my intention in my mind is pure and clear and compassionate, but that person responds or reacts in a way as though they think I'm saying something different than I mean, I can then become reactive in response. And I think most of us have that experience of kind of ping pong back and forth, where it's just emotions getting heightened and it really increasing in intensity, and suddenly you're not talking about the thing you wanted to be talking about, and you're not talking in the way that you intended. You're both emotionally reacting to each other. So if I pay attention, even if I haven't gotten all the information on the front end of the conversation, there's a lot of information I can draw from a conversation. And if I can stay centered, if I can breathe and recognize those responses in my friend who I'm speaking to, that can inform how I proceed, whether or not I continue the conversation in that moment, how I modulate my voice or my tone, or what I think I might need to communicate prior to or around the larger message I'm trying to get through. And when we have conversations about relationship or emotion, there's a higher chance of things escalating. And so my attention allows me to gather information within the conversation to ensure that I'm not adding something I don't intend. And certainly I don't want to add something that escalates and pulls the whole thing away from the whole reason I wanted to have the conversation and the tone that I had intended to take. So for me, attention really allows our intention to move forward, and to stay at the center of our communication, above and beyond what we're saying, with a willingness to abandon it if in the moment it's starting to unravel into something that we didn't intend. And that's the thing about intentions. How many conversations have you had where either the other person said like, oh, well, I don't like that you said this, or, that makes me feel this way. And, it's tempting to say, well, that's not what I meant. That's not how I intended this. And that can be very true. And it's hard when another person says that to you, like, that's not what I meant. That's not what I intended. And that's going to happen sometimes. Again, there's information to be drawn there, but I think if you pair intention with attention, it decreases the likelihood of your intention being lost, because you've done the work to gather information about this person that you've gone into this conversation wanting to care for and wanting to communicate with, and gathering information about them that just offers a level of care that supports the positive intention you might be going into that conversation with. It just bolsters it. And you're not, I think it makes it easier for me to not crutch on, well, I had good intentions. Sure. But if I do the work of paying attention, I can execute those intentions more effectively. Something I was thinking about this morning and matters a lot to me in my practice of clear and compassionate communication. It doesn't always go right, but there's always so much to learn, and that's just a big piece of learning that I received recently that I wanted to share with you all. So may we all communicate clearly, compassionately, with intention and attention. Thank you so much.